You people never learn, do you? The words didn't come out loud. Not really. More like a breath that hung in the air, thin and cold, the kind that made nearby conversations collapse into silence without anyone understanding why. A knee rested firm against the back of Marcus Reed's neck, not crushing, not dramatic, just present, too present, pinning him to the warm pavement that still held the heat of a long afternoon. The street had been busy seconds ago, the kind of late-day rhythm where engines hum, shoes scrape, and distant horns blur into background noise. But now everything slowed, stretched, as if the city itself hesitated. Marcus didn't struggle. That was the first thing people noticed, though no one said it out loud. His hands were visible, palms open, fingers slightly curled against the asphalt, the texture rough against skin that had spent years gripping steering wheels, lifting boxes, living quietly. A paper pharmacy bag lay a few feet away, tipped over, an orange bottle rolled just far enough to catch the sunlight, spinning once before settling still. The officer, Daniel Brooks, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority sat on him like a uniform within the uniform, steady, practiced, unquestioned. His radio crackled once, then went quiet again. Around them, a circle formed, not tight, not confrontational, just there. A woman in scrubs stood frozen mid-step, her badge swinging lightly against her chest. A teenager held a phone but hadn't decided yet whether to lift it higher. An older man shook his head once, subtle, almost invisible, before looking down at the ground like that might make him less involved. Somewhere down the block, a traffic light changed, but no cars moved. Marcus inhaled slowly, carefully, as if even breathing required permission. "Sir," he said, voice low, controlled, the kind of tone built from years of choosing calm over reaction. "I didn't do anything wrong." The sentence didn't rise. It didn't accuse. It simply existed, fragile but firm, like something that had been said many times before in places just like this. Brooks didn't respond right away. His gaze moved, not to Marcus, but to the growing edges of the scene, measuring, calculating, aware without appearing to be. Control wasn't about force. It was about presence. And right now, he had all of it. A car passed at barely 10 miles per hour, the driver's head turning just enough to register something unusual, but not enough to stop. Life tried to continue, but it couldn't quite find its rhythm again. The teenager finally lifted the phone a little higher. Not obvious, just enough. A second phone appeared across the street. Then another. Quiet. Careful. No one announced it. No one warned anyone. But something had already shifted, subtle as a shadow moving across concrete. Marcus' eyes stayed open, fixed on nothing and everything at once. The edge of a sneaker, the shimmer of heat above the road, the reflection of sky in a nearby window. He didn't plead. He didn't resist. He just remained. And in that stillness, in that almost unbearable quiet, something unseen had already begun recording a version of this moment that no one there, not even the man in control, could fully stop. Marcus Reed had learned a long time ago that silence could be louder than anything you said, and right now it was the only thing he had control over. So he held on to it the way a man holds on to balance when the ground feels uncertain beneath him, steady and deliberate, his breath measured not because he was calm, but because he had practiced this kind of moment before in smaller ways, in quieter rooms, in passing glances that lasted a second too long, in conversations that shifted the moment his name was said out loud. And even now, as the heat from the pavement pressed through his shirt and into his skin, he focused on something simple, something real, something that belonged to him. The image of his mother sitting by the window that morning with the sunlight catching the silver in her hair, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she barely touched, her voice soft but firm when she reminded him not to be late with the prescription. Not this time, not when the doctor said timing mattered. And he had nodded, grabbed his keys, and promised her he would be right back. Just a quick stop, just one delivery before heading straight home. Because that was the kind of man Marcus was, someone who kept his word even when no one was watching, someone who showed up, who worked 2 jobs, who knew the exact mileage between every street in his delivery route down to the 10th of a mile, because consistency meant everything when your life did not leave room for mistakes. And now that same man lay still on a city street while strangers decided what they were seeing, what they believed, what they were willing to do. And he could feel their presence without looking, The shift of weight from one foot to another, the quiet murmur of uncertainty, the hesitation that lived in the space between action and fear, and he understood it. He really did, because he had been that person too. The one who saw something was not right, but told himself it was not his place, that someone else would step in, that things like this sorted themselves out. Except sometimes they did not. Sometimes they stayed exactly like this, unresolved and heavy, waiting for something to change, and Marcus knew better than to expect that change to come from him in this moment. Not with a knee holding him in place, not with a voice above him that had already decided the narrative before a single question had been asked. So instead he chose something else, something quieter. He chose to remain exactly who he was, not louder, not smaller, just present, his fingers pressing lightly against the ground as if to remind himself that he was still here, still breathing, still a man with somewhere to be and someone waiting on him. And a few feet away, the orange prescription bottle caught another flicker of sunlight. Its label turned just enough to reveal a name that matched his, Marcus Reed, printed clearly in black ink. Undeniable, ordinary, human, and for a brief second his eyes moved toward it, not in panic, not in urgency, but in recognition, because that bottle was proof of something simple and important, that before this moment, before the silence and the watching and the weight of authority pressing down without explanation, he had been on his way somewhere that mattered, and that truth still existed whether anyone here chose to see it or not. Officer Daniel Brooks had built his career on moments like this. Not the loud ones that made headlines or the chaotic ones that spiraled out of control, but the quiet ones where authority settled into place without resistance, where a situation could be shaped simply by tone, posture, and the unspoken understanding that he was the one in charge. And as he stood there now, steady and composed, his breathing even, his gaze scanning the edges of the scene with practiced precision, he saw nothing out of the ordinary from his perspective, just another stop, another interaction, another man who fit a description that had been called in over the radio less than 10 minutes ago, vague enough to be flexible, specific enough to justify action. And Brooks had responded the way he always did, quickly, decisively, without hesitation. Because hesitation invited uncertainty, and uncertainty invited mistakes. And mistakes were not something he allowed himself to make. Not after 12 years on the force. Not after commendations that hung framed on the wall of his living room. Not after supervisors had described him as reliable, effective, someone who handled things before they escalated, someone who did not second-guess himself in the field. And that reputation mattered. It followed him into every shift, every encounter, shaping the way others saw him and the way he saw himself. And right now, standing over Marcus Reed, he believed he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what was required, maintaining control in a situation that, in his mind, justified it, even if the man beneath him appeared calm, even if there were no raised voices or sudden movements, because Brooks did not measure risk by what was visible in the moment. He measured it by what could happen, by what he had been trained to anticipate, and training had taught him to act first, to secure the situation before questions came later, and so he stayed firm, his posture unchanged, his presence unwavering, while around him the subtle shift in the crowd began to register in ways he did not fully acknowledge. A few more phones raised, a few more eyes fixed not with passive curiosity, but with quiet attention, and somewhere in the back of his awareness, there was a flicker, not doubt, not yet, but something adjacent to it, a recognition that this moment was no longer contained, that it was expanding beyond the boundaries he usually controlled. Yet even then he did not step back, did not adjust, because stepping back would mean reconsidering, and reconsidering would mean admitting that something about this situation might not be as clear as he believed, and clarity was the foundation of his authority. So instead he held steady, his jaw set, his voice measured when he finally spoke again. "Stay still," he said, not loudly, not aggressively, just enough to reinforce the structure he had created around this moment. A structure he trusted, a structure that had never failed him before, and yet as the seconds stretched and the quiet deepened, there was something else moving through the air now, something invisible but undeniable, carried in the steady hands holding those phones, in the lenses that did not blink, in the silent agreement forming among strangers that what was happening here mattered in a way that could not simply be dismissed, And though Brooks did not turn to look at them directly, he could feel it, the shift in attention, the weight of observation, the subtle but growing sense that this moment was being seen from angles he did not control, angles that would not rely on his version of events. And still he remained, anchored in his certainty, unaware that certainty itself was about to be tested in a way he had never experienced before. Marcus felt the shift before anyone said a word, not in the officer above him, not in the pressure or the posture, but in the air itself, in the way attention sharpened, focused, as if something unseen had crossed a line that could not be stepped back from. And he did not need to look to know that more people were watching now with intention instead of hesitation, that the quiet had changed from uncertainty into awareness. And still he stayed exactly where he was, not because he had no choice, but because he understood that this moment was no longer just about him. It was about what would happen next and how it would be seen, and that mattered more than anything he could say right now. His voice steady when he spoke again, softer this time, almost like he was speaking to the ground itself. "My name is Marcus Reed," he said, not to argue, not to challenge, but to anchor himself in something real, something undeniable. And for a brief second it seemed like the words settled into the space around them, simple and human, cutting through the tension without raising it. And somewhere in the circle a woman repeated it under her breath. Marcus, as if saying his name, made the situation clearer, more personal, harder to ignore, and a man across the street adjusted his phone, angling it higher now, no longer pretending to be unsure, while another voice, careful but firm, called out, "He is not resisting, not loud enough to provoke, just loud enough to exist." And that was when something small but significant happened, something easy to miss if you were not paying attention. Officer Brooks' gaze shifted again, not fully, not openly, but just enough to acknowledge that the narrative he had been holding on to was beginning to loosen at the edges. And for the first time since this moment began, there was a pause in his certainty, a fraction of a second where the situation did not feel entirely contained. And Marcus felt it, not through movement, not through words, but through the slightest change in presence, like a structure that had been solid now carrying the faintest crack beneath the surface. And he did not push it, did not react, because pushing would change the balance, would give the moment a direction it did not need. So instead he stayed grounded, his breathing even, his eyes open, fixed on that same quiet point ahead, while the city around them slowly began to return in fragments, a distant siren somewhere blocks away, the low hum of an engine idling too long, the soft shuffle of shoes on concrete as people adjusted their stance but did not leave, because now they were part of this, whether they wanted to be or not. And then from somewhere behind the line of onlookers came a different sound, not loud, not urgent, just distinct. The faint click of a device being adjusted, followed by a voice speaking into a phone with careful clarity. "Yes, I am reporting an incident. It is being recorded from multiple angles." And those words did something that no raised voice had done. They changed the weight of the moment, shifted it from something temporary into something that would last, something that would exist beyond this street, beyond this heat, beyond this exact second. And even though Marcus could not see the officer's face clearly from where he was, he could feel the change ripple through the space above him, subtle but undeniable, as if the realization had begun to settle in that whatever happened next would not belong to just one version of the story. And for the first time since he had been stopped, Marcus allowed himself a single thought, quiet but steady, that truth did not need to be forced, it only needed to be seen. The tension did not break all at once, it tightened first, drawing inward like a held breath that refused to release. And Marcus could feel it in the stillness around him, in the way no one stepped forward yet no one stepped away, in the way the space between every sound grew heavier, more deliberate, as if each second now carried weight that could not be ignored. And somewhere close, a voice spoke again, clearer this time, no longer hesitant. "He told you his name," the voice said, steady but not confrontational. And that single sentence seemed to land differently than anything before it, not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable, because it reframed the moment from a situation into a person. And for a brief second, the street felt like it shifted beneath that truth, subtle but real, and Officer Brooks' posture held, but not with the same effortless certainty as before. There was a rigidity now, a stillness that required effort to maintain, and his eyes moved again. Quicker this time, taking in the phones, the angles, the faces that were no longer passive. And even without turning fully, he knew that this was no longer contained, that whatever happened next would not stay here, would not disappear into paperwork or routine explanations. And Marcus sensed it too, not as relief, not yet, but as a change in direction, like a current shifting beneath the surface. And he stayed exactly as he was, grounded, present, his voice quiet when he spoke again. "I just need to get this to my mother," he said, not pleading, not defensive, just stating something simple and real. And for the first time, the words seemed to reach beyond the immediate space, because someone in the crowd repeated it, louder now. "He is trying to deliver medicine." And another voice followed. "You can check the bag." And the moment expanded again, growing beyond the control of any one person, shaped now by the accumulation of small truths being spoken aloud. And Brooks' jaw tightened, not in anger, but in calculation, the kind that comes when a situation no longer follows the expected path, when the structure begins to shift under pressure that cannot be dismissed. And for a fraction of a second, his hand moved slightly, not away, not retreating, but adjusting, as if reconsidering something he had already decided. And that small movement did not go unnoticed, not by Marcus, not by the crowd, not by the lenses quietly capturing every detail. And the sound of a distant siren grew closer now, not urgent, just approaching, a reminder that this moment was about to intersect with something larger than itself. And still, no one rushed, no one escalated, because the tension had reached a point where movement itself felt like a decision, and decisions mattered now more than ever. And Marcus focused on his breath again, steady, controlled, because that was the only thing he could fully own in this moment. The rhythm of it, the consistency of it, the proof that he was still here, still present, still a man whose story had not been fully told. And as the light shifted slightly across the pavement, catching the edge of that orange bottle once more, the label now fully visible to anyone who cared to look, there was a quiet realization, spreading through the scene, not spoken but understood, that this was no longer just an interaction. It was a moment being defined, and once defined, it could not be undone. The siren did not arrive like an interruption. It blended into the moment, low at first, then gradually clearer, weaving through the quiet tension that had settled over the street. And for a brief second it felt like time stretched even further, as if everything slowed to make room for what was about to happen next. And Marcus closed his eyes, not to escape, not to withdraw, but to center himself in something deeper than the noise, deeper than the weight pressing down, deeper than the eyes, watching from every angle, because in that stillness he could hear something steady, something constant, his own breath moving in and out, measured, controlled, a rhythm he refused to lose no matter what surrounded him. And the pavement beneath him no longer felt just hot or rough. It felt grounding, real, a reminder that he was still here in this exact moment, not defined by the voices above him, not reduced to assumptions, but present as himself. And for a few seconds the world seemed to narrow into that single awareness, the inhale, the exhale, the quiet persistence of being. And around him the air shifted again, not with urgency, but with something heavier, something reflective, as if the people standing there were no longer just witnesses but participants in a moment they would carry with them long after it ended. And no one spoke now, not because there was nothing to say, but because the weight of the situation had settled into something words could not easily hold. And even Officer Brooks felt it, though he did not show it outwardly. There was a pause in him, a stillness that was no longer just control, but something closer to awareness, something that existed just beneath the surface of his training and his certainty. And his gaze did not scan the crowd this time. It stayed forward, fixed, as if acknowledging without fully admitting that the moment had changed in a way he could not simply command back into place. And the phones remained steady, hands firm, capturing not just action but the absence of it, the quiet, the restraint, the reality of what was and what was not happening. And somewhere close, the faint rustle of fabric, the soft shift of someone stepping half a pace forward and then stopping again, unsure but unwilling to leave. And the orange prescription bottle caught the light once more, brighter now as the sun dipped lower, its label clear, its purpose undeniable, a small detail that carried more truth than any explanation could. And Marcus opened his eyes again, slowly, not searching, not reacting, just returning to the moment as it was. And in that return, there was something unshaken, something that had not been taken from him despite everything surrounding him, a quiet dignity that did not need to be spoken to exist. And as the siren grew closer, blending now with the soft hum of the city beginning to move again at the edges, there was a sense, subtle but certain, that whatever came next would not erase what had already been seen, that the truth of this moment had already taken shape in ways that could not be undone. And for the first time since it began, the silence no longer felt uncertain. It felt resolved, as if the story had already begun to write itself without needing anyone's permission. The second patrol car did not rush in. It rolled to a controlled stop along the curb, engine low, doors opening with a measured calm that felt almost deliberate. And from it stepped a sergeant, older, composed, the kind of presence that did not need to raise its voice to be understood. And for a moment he did not speak. He simply looked, taking in the scene not as a single moment, but as a sequence. The man on the ground, the officer standing over him, the circle of people holding steady, the phones raised not in chaos but in quiet certainty. And then his eyes moved to something else. Something smaller, something easier to miss if you were not paying attention, the angle of a body camera clipped to Brooks' uniform, the faint red light that blinked steadily, recording without pause, and beside it, the dash camera from the first patrol car still facing forward, its lens fixed directly on the scene, capturing everything from a distance that did not blink, did not shift, did not interpret. And for a brief second the sergeant's gaze lingered there, not long. Just enough to understand that this moment already existed beyond this street, beyond anyone's explanation, beyond control. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, even, but it carried weight. "What do we have here?" he asked, not as a question of authority, but as a request for clarity. And Brooks answered quickly, almost automatically, the words practiced, structured, familiar. But there was something different now. Something less certain beneath the surface, something that did not quite settle the way it usually did. And the sergeant listened, but his eyes did not stay on Brooks. They moved again, back to the scene itself, to Marcus, still composed, still not matching the description of resistance being described, and then to the crowd, where more phones were visible now, more angles, more quiet witnesses holding steady, and the realization moved through him not as surprise, but as recognition. This was no longer just a report. This was evidence already forming in real time. And without raising his voice, without creating a shift that would escalate the moment, he stepped closer, just one step, enough to change the dynamic without breaking it. "Ease up," he said, simple, direct, not loud, but final. And for the first time since this began, there was a pause that carried decision, a moment where authority met observation and could not ignore it. And Brooks hesitated, just a fraction, but enough for the weight of the situation to settle in fully, enough for the presence of those cameras, those silent witnesses, to move from background awareness into undeniable reality. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the posture changed, not dramatically, not abruptly, but enough to shift the balance of the moment. And Marcus felt it immediately, not as release, not as relief, but as change. The kind that happens quietly before anyone acknowledges it out loud. And the sergeant's eyes moved once more, scanning not for control now, but for truth, aligning what was said with what was seen, what was claimed with what was recorded. And in that alignment, something became clear, something that did not require argument, did not require explanation, because it was already there, captured, preserved, undeniable. And the street, which had held its breath for so long, seemed to exhale all at once, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to signal that the moment had turned, that whatever story had been forming was no longer controlled by a single voice. And in the quiet that followed, the truth did not need to be spoken, it only needed to exist. The shift did not come with a command or a sudden movement. It came in the form of quiet acknowledgement, the kind that settles into a space when something undeniable has already taken root. And Officer Brooks stepped back just enough for the weight of the moment to redistribute. Not dramatically, not in a way that called attention to itself, but in a way that could not be reversed, and Marcus felt the difference immediately. The absence of pressure not as relief, but as space, space to breathe. More fully, space to exist without being defined by someone else's assumption. And for a brief second he stayed exactly where he was, grounded, steady, as if confirming that the moment had truly shifted before allowing himself to move. And then slowly, carefully, he pushed himself up, not rushed, not reactive, just deliberate, his hands brushing lightly against the pavement as he rose to a seated position, then to his feet. And the crowd adjusted with him, not closing in, not retreating, just making room, as if instinctively understanding that this was no longer a moment to contain, but one to witness fully. And the sergeant remained where he was, his presence now centered not on control, but on clarity, his gaze moving between Marcus and Brooks, then briefly to the cameras, as if aligning everything in his mind without needing to say it out loud. And when he finally spoke again, his voice carried a different weight, not questioning, not commanding, but resolving. "Let us take a look at what we have," he said. And though the words were simple, they marked a clear transition, because now the focus was no longer on assumption, it was on evidence, on what had already been captured from angles no single person could control. And a nearby officer reached toward the patrol car, glancing at the dash camera interface, while another adjusted the position of a body camera feed. And even without seeing the screens directly, the presence of that process changed everything, because it meant the story was no longer being constructed in the moment. It was being revealed, piece by piece, frame by frame. And Marcus stood quietly, his eyes not fixed on anyone in particular, his posture calm, unchanged, as if he had already accepted that the truth would speak for itself. And across the street, the teenager lowered his phone slightly, but did not stop recording, as if understanding that the end of one moment was the beginning of another. And the woman in scrubs exhaled slowly, a breath she had been holding for longer than she realized. And somewhere behind them, a voice spoke softly, almost to itself. "It is all on camera." And that sentence did not rise, did not echo, but it settled into the scene like a final piece of something that had already been forming. And Brooks stood there, no longer the center of control, his posture still composed but no longer unquestioned, his eyes briefly meeting the sergeant's before shifting away, not in defiance, not in agreement, but in recognition of something that could not be undone. And as the light continued to shift across the street, catching reflections in windows and glinting off the surfaces of the cameras that had captured every second, there was a quiet understanding shared among everyone present, that this moment, once uncertain, had now become clear, not because someone declared it, but because it had been seen, and once seen, it could not be unseen. No one announced the conclusion. It arrived quietly, settling into the space the same way the tension had, but this time it did not press down. It lifted, subtle but unmistakable, and Marcus stood there for a moment longer, not rushing to leave, not looking for acknowledgement, just standing as himself in a place where, seconds ago, that had not been enough, and now it was. And across from him the sergeant gave a small nod, not formal, not performative, just a recognition that required no explanation. And that nod carried more weight than any apology spoken too quickly ever could. And Marcus returned it just as simply, not out of obligation, but because dignity does not need to be loud to be understood. And then his attention shifted to the ground beside him where the orange prescription bottle still rested, catching the last angle of sunlight before the day began to soften into evening. And he stepped forward, bent slightly, and picked it up with careful hands, checking the label without urgency, as if reconnecting with the part of his life that had been paused but not taken from him. And the paper bag followed, folded once, held lightly at his side. And in that small, ordinary motion, something larger became clear, that the moment had not changed who he was, it had only revealed it. And around him the crowd began to loosen, not dispersing all at once, but easing, conversations starting in low voices, phones lowering one by one, though not completely, because something about what they had witnessed would not be set down so easily. It would travel with them, carried in memory, in footage, in quiet conversations later that night. And Officer Brooks remained where he was, no longer at the center, no longer defining the moment, his posture still composed but altered, as if something internal had shifted in a way that did not yet have words, and the sergeant spoke again. But softer now, closer, not for the crowd, not for the record, just for the space between them. And whatever was said did not need to be heard to be understood, because the outcome had already taken shape, and Marcus turned toward the sidewalk, taking a step, then another, not hurried, not hesitant, just moving forward with the same steady rhythm he had carried into this day before it was interrupted. And as he walked, the city resumed around him, cars moving again, distant sounds returning to their place, the ordinary flow of life reassembling itself, piece by piece. And yet something remained, something quiet and lasting, the kind of silence that follows truth when it has been seen clearly, when it no longer needs to argue for its place. And Marcus did not look back, not because he was avoiding anything, but because there was nothing behind him that needed to be carried forward. The moment had already done its work, and ahead of him there was still somewhere to be, someone waiting. And the light stretched long across the pavement as he moved through it, steady, present, unchanged. And in that final image, there were no raised voices, no declarations, no need for explanation. Just a man walking with quiet certainty, and the echo of a moment where truth had stood still long enough to be seen.